It is 6 o'clock and time for our next Parent Academy presentation. So good evening, Rock Hill, and welcome. We missed you. We hope you had a very good holiday last week and enjoyed your Valentine's Day. But now it is time for our new presentation. My name is Dr. Nancy Turner, and I am your Director of Mental Health for the Rock Hill Schools. Our co-host is with us tonight, Cindy Taubenkimmel. Good evening, Cindy.
Good evening, Dr. Turner, and good evening, Rock Hill. As Dr. Turner said, my name is Cindy Taubenkimmel, and I'm the coordinator of ParentSmart, Rock Hill Schools Parent Education Partnership, where parents are at the heart of education.
And tonight, we welcome back Ms. Allison Hirad, our prevention specialist at Keystone Substance Abuse Services in Rock Hill. You know, each of your presentations, and we've had you on a few times, and every time it has been amazing. You offer up the most up-to-date information on this growing problem among our young teens when it comes to our concerns with drugs and alcohol and vaping. So we are excited for your presentation. Let me take a few minutes to introduce you, and you will be on. Miss Allison Hirad is a prevention specialist at Keystone Substance Abuse Services in Rock Hill, and she received her Bachelor of Arts in Sociology at Winthrop University. Allison is in the beginning stage of her career in the prevention field. She has been working and volunteering with school-age children for many, many years. During that time, she formed a wide understanding on how to address youth and impact them in a way that would make them more successful in their future endeavors. Allison's goal as a prevention educator is to see the next generation become healthier and more educated on how their decisions can impact the future. Please give your full attention to Ms. Allison Hirad.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. So we're just going to kind of jump right into it. And I always kind of share around the same things, but this stuff is always changing and growing. So we're going to focus today on adolescent addictions. And we're going to start off by looking at kind of what might prime someone to have an addiction and the predisposition to addiction. And that's going to come down to a couple different things. We're going to talk about genetics. We're going to talk about the environment that these teens live in, and we're going to talk about age of first use. So when we look at genetics, you can't change your genes, right? Addiction does have a genetic component. So you can see on the screen that it talks about 4 times more likely to struggle with an addiction if a family member does. That is true, but it's on a couple levels. So if you kind of picture like a family tree, if I am kind of looking at my family tree, if one of my parents or my aunts or uncles struggle with an addiction, that means my personal self will be 4 times as likely to struggle with some form of addiction as well. Okay, so that kind of first branch is kind of the key factor in knowing if I could potentially struggle. The further away the branches of the tree, the less likely that struggle is going to be. But it's also very important to note, just because someone does struggle in my family with addiction does not mean I will. It depends on our decisions. Along with that, there's a couple different aspects. So if someone struggles with alcoholism is linked more prevalently to genetics than any other addiction. However, just because maybe an uncle struggles with alcohol doesn't mean the other person would struggle with that same substance, okay? That other substance could be anything. We always like to tell kids, you can come from anywhere and still struggle with an addiction. You can come from anywhere and not struggle with an addiction. It all depends on the decisions we make around these substances. Our next one is kind of environment. Being around substances could cause one either to not want to involve with them at all and kind of be very standoffish towards them, or it can also cause them to be normalized around this person. So if you've ever seen there was an old video that I don't know the name of it, where a child grew up in a house where someone was struggling with alcoholism, and, beer in the fridge became normal to them. So when they went to their friend's house and there was no alcohol in the fridge, they didn't realize that that was uncommon, right? Because it was so normal in their life for that to go on. It was so normal for it to be at the table and them to have all these things associated with it. So a child can kind of become normalized to that around them, or they can say, you know what, I don't want this around me. Coping skills can help also with environment. So even if a child is not growing up in a place where there is any kind of substance use around them, they are exposed to things. The internet has all kinds of stuff on it, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, TV, the news. So making sure we have coping skills with these kids in place is very helpful. And the last one I want to focus on the most is age of use. So age of first use is very important when we talk about this. So our brains are not fully developed until we're 25 years old, which is kind of a shock to everyone because they're like, then why is the age 21? I know my sixth graders ask me all the time when I tell them, like, guys, your brain's not going to be fully developed till you're 25. They're like, Miss Allison, then why isn't the legal drinking age 25? I'm like, well, that's a good question. And the way our brains develop is from the backs to the front. And that front part is the last part to develop. And that's our decision-making part. So we want to keep that part as healthy in kids as long as possible. So the younger a child is when they start trying something, the more dangerous it can be. You can see the numbers are on the screen. Or research has been done that if a child starts using something or just tries something for the first time under the age of 14, they are 40 times more likely to struggle with substance use in whatever substance. If they are 17 when they first try something, it goes to 20%. If they're at 20 when they first try something, it goes to 10. And the percentage tends to go down the older the person is. So that's why they kind of push it off to 21. And if we can push it to 25, even better. I also have this picture on here that kind of shows that if you've ever been around a teenager for even a short amount of time, teenagers' brains operate completely different than an adult brain. I don't know what switches on and off between adult and adolescence, but there is the impulse control, the ability to kind of fully process a situation is completely different. So you can see the one where it's got kind of traffic everywhere is a teenage brain and everything's going 100 miles a minute and there's tons of things going on. Where the adult brain, the one holding like the book or the file, you can see everything's kind of more smooth. There's transitions, everything's going the directions it should be. Kind of showing, imagine adding, any kind of substance that impairs you to this one traffic where it's going all directions. Could be pretty dangerous, pretty devastating. So we want to keep that in mind about our kids that, they are exposed to things. So we want to make sure that we let them know, hey, listen, this isn't a decision I'm making for you. This is a decision you should make for yourself. So what can parents do, right? We all are kind of predisposed to certain things. We all know our family dynamics, our family genetics. We all know, what goes on in our homes. So what can parents do to kind of help kids navigate that stuff? So the kind of 6 things we're going to talk about is bonding, role models, risk levels, being aware, monitoring, and talking. Okay. So those are kind of the 6 things that when we talk about how to help our kids through this and how to kind of make sure they make smart decisions with that, these are the topics that get brought up. So we talk about bonding, having a healthy relationship, okay, with our kids, being supportive of your student, making sure they feel safe to come to you, okay, making sure that they know that you are a safe place, that you will help them with whatever situation they have going on, and making sure they have, even if it's not, they have a healthy adult in their life they can go to. And then a role model. It's amazing what teens kind of listen to, even teens and kids watch and listen way more than we realize. I know I had a conversation the other day with my mom, and all of a sudden my teenage sister in the back of the car was like, I heard that. I was like, okay, well, didn't know you were listening. Okay, thank goodness we weren't talking about a present or something, because they listen way more than we realize. Even if they have those AirPods in, they might only have the volume very low, or they might not have anything in there. They listen. So we need to model ways to handle legal drugs and talk about the ones that are not. So we talk about this with drinking. This does not mean, I get asked, parents like, I should never drink in front of my child. That's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you to make educated decisions about it. Okay. Talk to your kids about it. Make sure that you show them responsible drinking. Hey, mom and dad are over 21. We're having one drink. We're not getting super intoxicated. No one is driving. We're making smart decisions. and making sure we have that and show them that, because they will model that when they get older and they have an option to drink. And then risk level. We all have a certain risk level, right? Trauma, impulse, control, family history, all that adds to our risk level. And there is not an addictive personality per se, but we do have traits that can put us more at risk. So if you have a child that is a risk taker, if you have a child that's super outgoing, super adventurous and fearless, those are more likely to be risky behaviors or risk factors. However, those are the same characteristics and the same traits that are found in almost every CEO. So they're not bad traits to have. And I want to make sure we understand that these kids that are super outgoing and super adventurous and want to try things, they're not going to always turn out horrible. They're not going to turn out and have addictions and things like that. They can be successful. Okay? And we shouldn't push them down and say, no, you can't do that. We want to make sure we harness that energy, putting them in leadership programs, making sure they go out for a sport so that risk-taking behavior is good risks. Hey, we're going to try you out for this sport and have you see if you can make it. Hey, like All on Board does a talent show. That's healthy risk-taking, getting on stage and showing your talent. That is where we can harness that energy. All right, and then kind of being in the know, being aware. Know your kid, know what trends are going on, know it's okay to talk about this stuff. Lots of parents are kind of like, I don't know when's the right time to talk about this stuff. If you're already asking yourself that, it's probably time to already start talking, okay? And it just depends on your student, depends on how your family dynamic works, and we can get into that a little bit more in a minute. Okay. Set boundaries and stick to them. Kids thrive on structure, so making sure you do have some form of structure and that you stick to the boundaries that you set. Kids are going to test boundaries. That's just what they do. Making sure we stick to them. And my biggest one that I always I love to like pause here for a second and just say talk. Talk to your kids. Let your kids talk to you. Ask them questions. Let them ask you questions without judgment, okay? They hear things. They hear things all the time. They hear things, from school. They hear things on social media. If you're watching the news, they hear things on the news and they might not understand it fully, okay? They hear you guys talking about stuff and they're curious and they might want to know. But if they come to you and all of a sudden you kind of go, well, why would you ask that? They might not want to come to you again, right? And instead they might turn to their friends or worse, Google. And Google is not always right, as I tell my 6th graders. So making sure they feel safe and like, okay, I can go to them and I can ask them these questions without feeling like I'm going to get attacked or like I'm going to be interrogated. Okay. But also making sure that we're asking questions as the adults in their lives. Like, hey, I heard this went on at school, or hey, did you see this? And kind of saying like how much they know about certain things, engaging that conversation based off what they come back to you with. Okay. Things to watch out for. So we're going to kind of pause here and talk through these probably a little bit more in depth about what to watch out for if you have a teenager and you're worried about substance use. Now, some of these are just typical teenage behavior, but when they get a little more advanced, that's when we kind of need to pay closer attention. So aggressive or unusual behavior. So you probably spent a lot of time with this child as they've grown up. So just making sure that we monitor their behavior. And if we see that their behavior is out of the ordinary, and it's not just like a one-time thing that happened one day a few months ago, like you've noticed it's happening more regularly and you're not sure why, that's definitely something to take note of. Changes in hygiene, smell, and appearance are often a very big sign of substance use for a couple reasons. One, they could be trying to hide the scent of something. It could be, covering up with perfume, cologne, whatever they can get their hands on. So if you notice like, wow, they smell like really strongly of this certain body spray, that could be a potential sign. But also the opposite. If you notice that they haven't been, washing as often, or they haven't been taking care of themselves as often as they used to, that's also a sign, because a lot of times when someone's struggling with addiction, their brain focuses on what they're addicted to rather than anything else. School or work problems. So if they have a part-time job, or you're noticing more problems in school, whether that be the teacher saying like they can't sit still, or they don't attend, or they're not turning things in. If it's abnormal for them, that's definitely something to take note of. Because like I said just a second ago, when someone has an addiction, everything else kind of gets pushed to the sidelines and our brains focus on what we're addicted to. Requests for money or taking money without permission, or if their requests for money have kind of increased more recently, that can be a big thing. We'll see in a minute that some of these items that kids are using these days are actually pretty expensive. So if their requests for money have become more frequent, more intense, or they're just taking money, that's definitely something to take note of. New friend groups. So this is the one that kind of gets a little tricky because a lot of times friend groups switch when we're teenagers. We don't have class with each other anymore, or we don't have lunch. But if they're swapping the kind of friends they hang out with, so if it was one group and now it's kind of a different group and you're not so sure, or they kind of stop talking about their friends completely, that's a sign that we need to maybe have a conversation with them like, hey, what's going on? I haven't seen so-and-so lately, or I haven't heard you talk about that person. Just to kind of get a feel for what's going on. And then increased secretiveness or being more private. This is one I also like to kind of pause at and say that is typical teenage behavior as well. Like they're getting to a spot where, yeah, they're not full adults yet, but no, they're not kids. They kind of want their space. They want their privacy. But if they're being more secretive than normal, or if you have a kid that's an oversharer and all of a sudden they're not talking as much, that's a big sign that they're trying to hide something and they don't want to talk because they don't want to slip up and say something they didn't mean to share accidentally. Or, if they used to be a door open kid, their door was always open, and now their bedroom door's shut constantly, that can also be another sign that they're maybe being a little secretive. All right, so common adolescent addictions. Now I like to say, when we get into this, we're going to go over a few. Now, this doesn't mean that these are the most common. This just means in our area, when I've talked to, teachers, when I've talked to students that have gotten referred, these are kind of the substances that they point out as, yes, this is what's kind of popular at our school, or this is what people seem to be using. So we're starting off with vapes and vaping because, as you know, vaping, or as you probably know, vaping has kind of blown up in the last few years. It's been a constant problem, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere or getting any better, no matter what we've thrown at it. So they did up the law from age 18 to 21 for nicotine products, hoping that would help kind of younger kids not be able to get their hands on it. And they did also put a ban on pod-based flavors, hoping that that would get kids not to be able to be interested in them. Didn't work completely, and we'll talk about why. So when we talk about the nicotine that's in these products, that's what they're addicted to, but it's nothing like the nicotine in a regular cigarette. So you have salt-based nicotine and you have free-based nicotine. Free-based nicotine is what was in kind of old school cigarettes. And when free-based nicotine is kind of, lit on fire and smoked, it kind of causes a burning in the back of the throat. And so a lot of people that would first try cigarettes would be like, no, I really don't like that. Okay. Where salt-based nicotine is what's in these vapes, and it burns at a different temperature and it burns smoother. So when these kids hit a vape, all of a sudden it goes down very smooth and there's none of that burning, coughing sensation that typically happens with a cigarette. Now, I'm going to pause here and specify that just because a student starts vaping, we have found, and kids have told me that they've started vaping and moved to cigarettes, or they do both. So don't think that cigarettes are just completely out, because they're not. They are still around, because once someone gets kind of hooked on nicotine, they'll use nicotine in many forms. So a lot of these kids will say, well, if I can't, get my hands on a vape, I'll have a cigarette, because that might be more readily available. So it's kind of a catch-22 with these kids as to what they're using with this. The vapes are definitely more popular, especially in middle high school age kids, but they can kind of shift. And then flavors are what draw these kids in a lot of times. And they got rid of pod-based flavors. Now, pod-based flavors were, you would have a vaping device, you would buy a pod and put the pod in the vaping device. Okay. And that pod would be what was flavored. So they banned those a couple of years ago, meaning that you could not sell any pod-based systems. So the device was reusable, but the pod was not. However, like many laws, there is a loophole that didn't say you couldn't sell disposable flavored vapes. So that's what they kind of got into. And I have a picture of a few different vape brands that kids in our area have said, yeah, these are the most popular. This is what we're using. So you've got Lost Mary, Truly Bar, which I find ironic because that is also, Truly is also alcohol, an Elf Bar, and a One Stick. So these are kind of the most popular brands that I'm being told by our middle and high schoolers right now that get referred to me for vaping. These are the brands that they say, yeah. And it's typically not like, oh, this is my favorite or that's my favorite. It's just whatever they can get their hands on, because they are not supposed to be getting these. We'll talk a little bit about how they probably are. Now, I always get asked on here, how much are they? So if we look at this, this is one of the Elf bars, and this is, when you read flavors, it says it's kiwi and summer strawberry flavored blend together. They're blended together for a top-notch vape. Not my words, their words. So that's how they kind of market this. And this one costs $18. And now this was online, so they would also have to pay shipping. But you can also see it says 5,000 puffs. Now, I don't know exactly how long 5,000 puffs would take someone, but I do know that these kids often share. And that some kids have said, like, yeah, a vape can last a week. So give or take a week, it might be more, it might be less, just depending on if they're sharing, how often they're using it, and things like that. So concerns with vaping is, number one, being addicted to these items, because nicotine is highly addictive, and people sometimes, especially teenagers, forget that. I often like to tell them, cigarettes became addictive, and you guys didn't want those. The generations before you knew they were dangerous. So when these cigarette companies learned they were losing money, they decided to revamp their nicotine into these vapes and resell it so they would be making money. So I try to explain that to them so they know, like, hey, listen, this is kind of the same concept they did with cigarettes. It's just a new product. Another concern is nicotine poisoning. So our bodies can get too much nicotine in them that they can't handle them, especially on a still developing body. Right? Especially in someone who is under 21, if they get too much nicotine in their system, they can get, it's in the yellow box at the bottom, headaches, nausea, dizziness, breathlessness, collapse, loss of consciousness. Right? And that's all just from getting too much nicotine in their system. There's also different lung illnesses being linked to vaping. So you can see that one right there, Ebola, I believe is how it's pronounced. And it's basically a lung injury due to vaping. Now, vapes are still very new, especially these kind of disposable ones. We're less than 10 years in. So they're not sure exactly what long-term effects are going to look like. When cigarettes first came out, people didn't know that they caused all these bad things. And then 20, 30 years later, they were like, oh no, this is causing bad stuff to happen. Okay? So we don't know the concerns. And that's why I put the guinea pig on there, because kind of our kids are the guinea pigs for these vaping companies, right? To see, hey, is that going to cause issues or is that going to be okay? In 2019, they were finding that 1 in 3 high schoolers were vaping. We're probably seeing that number go up. So it might be like 1 in 2 at this point, because it is becoming more common. And we are trying to do our best to educate kids about this stuff and about the dangers surrounding it, and telling them, like, hey, listen, just because, it looks interesting doesn't mean it's safe. And just because we don't have the research doesn't mean it's safe. All right. Now, I put marijuana next because marijuana and vapes are semi-connected, and we're going to talk about why. So when we get into the marijuana, we're going to talk about carts and edibles. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a marijuana cart? A marijuana cart is a THC vape. Okay, very similar. They might, look a little different, but basically it's the exact same thing. But a lot of teenagers are calling them carts. I just met with a student last week who was talking to me about vaping carts, and the problem is sometimes they look very similar to vapes to the point you don't know which is which. Companies are smart, they brand them like that. So kids might get caught with a vape that's really a cart, and they're not going to tell that, hey, this isn't actually nicotine, right? So just being in the know of that, a lot of times we can't tell unless it's tested or we know of a brand. So that's kind of what they look like. This is just a range of what they could look like. And basically they take a lot of the marijuana that's being used in teenagers is not kind of the leaf marijuana that people think about. So it's not that like crunched up leaf or herbal looking stuff. It's a liquid, and it's this yellowish liquid that looks very similar to nicotine. That's what a lot of these teenagers are getting their hands on these days. So I found online an example of kind of a marijuana vape pen that would go for about $40, right? And this is where I want to kind of tell you guys, this is one way kids are getting their hands on it, is the internet, right? So all I have to do to order one of these is have a card and click, yes, I'm over 21. It didn't ask for age verification, right? So who's to say I'm not 21 doing this, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, the risks associated with these marijuana carts or these THC vapes is there's an extremely high level of nicotine. So basically they take a regular cannabis or marijuana plant and that's already chemically changed, and they mix it up and they put butane oil on it, and they, do all the sciencey stuff, and they get that yellowish liquid. And that yellowish liquid can be 90% THC. To put that in perspective, marijuana before that's going to be probably like 20%. So we're looking at 90% THC, which is going to get someone to a very dangerous level of intoxication where they're not going to be, able to fully say like, this is a really good idea. Sometimes when it's lower levels, they might have some control. At this point, especially in a young developing brain, it's going to have serious impacts. Not only that, but these items are not regulated. They're not legal in our state. And so no one's checking them to make sure like, hey, are these ingredients actually what's on there, right? They could put vegetable oil in it. They could put some other substance in it, and we would never know. And that was a conversation we've had with students is, how do they know that they're getting the same thing? If they're ordering from different places or they're getting it from different friends, how do you know exactly what you're getting? And the answer that I was told back by a student was, well, I don't. And I'm like, okay, so that could be a risk. And they're like, well, yeah, sometimes I worry about what it's actually in it. I was like, yeah, because we don't know what it actually contains. So there is a very big risk associated. All right, edibles. Edibles is another way that teenagers are using marijuana, and they also have a very high percentage of THC. Some levels are above 90, some are less. It just depends. But edibles are often packaged to look like candies, to look like things. They will say on it that it's something else, but it'll be slight changes. And they affect the body differently. So when we talk about edibles, if someone smokes something, instantly gets into their bloodstream, right? And they feel that intoxicating feeling, they feel the high feeling that they're getting from marijuana. If someone eats something, it takes a lot longer for their body to process and digest. So what they've seen is that people will eat an edible, not feel anything in the first few minutes, eat another one, and by the time they have gotten to where their body processes it, they're super intoxicated or super high, basically, to the point that it's very dangerous, and they can get acute marijuana intoxication or be, too under the influence. And it can be scary. They can hallucinate. They can have extreme paranoia. And a lot of times, even teenagers have talked to me and said, yeah, it's not a good experience because they have had so much, they get very impaired. So that's also something to keep in mind. And these, once again, can be ordered very easily online, or if someone goes out of state and brings them back and shares them. You are supposed to be in states where marijuana is legal. The legal age is 21. However, people get their hands on things they're not supposed to get all the time. So just being mindful of that. All right. And alcohol. So I realize that a lot of times when we talk about stuff on here, we don't kind of take a dive into alcohol because we're worried about the vapes. We're worried about the marijuana. But alcohol is still around, and alcohol is still one of the most abused substances. And it has dangers just like any other substance. The dangers are alcohol poisoning, injury due to intoxication. So being, whether it's injury to yourself or to someone else, maybe it's a DUI, and addiction. So a lot of times we think, well, alcohol is the legal one. Or yes, like I drink alcohol at home, so why shouldn't my child when they're of age? Yes. Okay. I understand that's where we're coming from. But alcohol still has an age limit, and it has that age limit for a reason. Not only are their brains still developing, but alcohol does get people impaired, and they make very different decisions under the influence of alcohol than if they weren't under the influence of alcohol. So we need to keep that in mind as well, and know that kids still try alcohol. So if you have alcohol at home, or you've noticed maybe you have less alcohol at home, keeping in mind, what kinds of alcohol kids tend to lean towards. So you have kind of one of two things that will go on. Some kids have told me they go for, the ones that don't taste like alcohol, more the fruity flavored. And then I've been told by other students, they go for more of the liquor, tequila type stuff, because they can, use less and it's stronger. So that's also something to keep in mind when we talk about adolescence and substance use. Now, this is where I want to kind of get into what cross-faded is. So cross-faded is when multiple substances are being used at once. So marijuana and alcohol are often the two that are cross-faded. So this is what a lot of kids are doing, and it's highly dangerous for a couple reasons. One, anytime you mix substances, bad idea. Two, if you mix alcohol that is a depressant with THC that is not a depressant, it's a psychoactive drug, your body's going to be very confused, because a depressant is made to slow our hearts down, right? It makes our hearts beat a lot slower. It makes our body more numb to things and not ready to do activities. And THC can have a couple different effects. So cross-fading those, as the kids call it, or mixing them, is going to confuse our bodies, because THC makes our hearts beat faster. So now you've got one substance saying go fast, one substance saying go slow, and your body's going to be super confused. So noticing that if you hear that term, to be very aware of what that conversation is detailing, because that is one of the terms that kids these days are using to mean they're using some sort of substance. Now, I always get asked, who is doing this? Like, what are they doing? Where, when, how? All the questions. And it's very difficult. So we've kind of gone over who is really, anybody can kind of get their hands on these things. It's just making sure that we educate our kids about the decisions they make and the risks associated with it. And not trying to scare them into like, you will never use, but explaining to them the risks. Scare tactics don't work, especially on teenagers, but explaining like, hey, listen, we want to keep you healthy. We want to keep you safe. And this stuff doesn't do that. And here's why. Okay. Not just you should never do it, but explaining the why for them. Because if you just say don't do things, a lot of times teenagers are going to be like, well, why? Watch me. So explaining that to them. The what, we've gone over kind of the what is popular right now, but just kind of keeping an eye, just like fashion trends, a lot of substance trends kind of circle back. So keeping that in mind as well. Where are they getting it from? When are they getting it? And how are they getting it? Are always some big questions. So a lot of times it's social media, right? Online is a big deal. Because you can order things very easily off the internet, and because, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok links you to the rest of the world. I was just at a conference that was talking about, it's no longer the guy selling stuff on the side of the corner you have to worry about. It's the people on the phone selling stuff you have to worry about, because kids are targeted for certain things, right? We're all targeted for certain ads, but they know who's doing what on what phones. So I'm actually working on a social media presentation now that I'll be glad to share with Rock Hill School District once we get it out. But it's all about the fact that, on these phones, these kids, sometimes random people pop up. Oh, it's another follower. Okay. And things are posted and they don't always realize. Like, we saw an Instagram post that had a substance that someone was trying to sell, but the hashtags underneath that people could click on and find that picture were hashtag dog love, or hashtag puppy love, hashtag, German Shepherd, things like that, for the substance that was being sold. So being mindful of that, knowing not all things on social media are bad, but having an understanding of your child's social media, understanding what apps they're on, what is the purpose of that app, asking questions about the app, okay? Maybe even getting the app yourself so you can kind of get a feel for what it is. Staying tuned for kind of what's going on. Pop culture constantly changing. Once you think you understand something, 6 more things are going to pop up. But going on social media and seeing what's trending, okay? Maybe asking them questions like, oh, what are you listening to? Hey, I heard this about so-and-so, some celebrity. What do you know about it? Asking the questions, engaging them in what's on their social media can be very helpful, because they're going to probably be more open to you, right? And knowing that not everything you see on your social media is what they're seeing on theirs, because they are in a different age group most of the time, and they are getting different things, and they are staying on certain things longer than you would stay on them because of the age difference in your interests. So knowing that, and understanding that social media does have an impact. Now take a breath, because as a parent, I'm sure this can be very overwhelming. I sometimes forget that because I teach this stuff and because I do this, all day long, that it can be a lot to process. It can be a lot to take in. I know I talk to my mom sometimes and she's like, okay, wow. And I was like, oh, sorry. So just take a breath real quick and know you're listening to this and you're learning things. That is already a step in the right direction, making sure you understand it and that you're in the know about this stuff. Right. So back to kind of what we talked about, because I just want to circle back and make sure you guys remember that there is a way to help, and there is a way to make sure that our kids stay safe and stay smart when it comes to this stuff. So we're bonding. We're making sure that our kids have a safe adult to go to. They have some kind of relationship with someone they can talk to and talk about things with. We're being good role models, making sure they have good role models, making sure that we make decisions and model how we would like them to make certain decisions. We understand our risk levels and we explain our risk levels to our kids, right? So explaining addiction runs in our family. It's nothing to be ashamed about. If you saw how many families addiction runs in, you'd be shocked, because it's more than you would think. Okay. But having those conversations, okay, starting at whatever age you think is appropriate for your child. So if you have addiction running in your family and they see it, maybe starting that conversation younger, okay, rather than older, because they've already seen so much by the time they're older. If you don't, they're already seeing things social media wise. They're hearing things on the internet. They're hearing things on the news that you watch. I know I had a student come to me the other day and say, Miss Allison, I heard this on the news and I didn't want to ask my mom. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. And let's talk about why you didn't want to ask. Okay. So making sure we understand our risk levels and explain those to our students. Making sure we are being aware of what we're watching, what they're hearing. We're being aware of what's going on in their life, being aware of what's, being said at school and things like that, making sure that we just have an overall understanding of the world they're growing up in, because it's very different than it was even 5 years ago, right? Technology has grown so much. They have constant access to everyone around the world all the time. So they're learning things at a much different pace. So making sure we understand that. We're monitoring to see if there's changes in our kids. We're monitoring to make sure that, they're kind of staying on track, or that if we are seeing those changes, we're seeing what those changes are about. And we're talking to them. Okay. We're trying not to accuse. We're just having an open conversation about, okay, what's going on? Or, hey, let's talk about this. Okay. And they may be reluctant at first. A lot of times this is scary to talk about for some kids. And it's very like taboo and they're unsure. But keep going at it. And eventually they'll be like, well, you know what? I do have a question. Or, you know what? I did hear this. Okay. So having those conversations. And then coping skills is a huge thing. So a lot of kids that I talk to will say, well, I started doing, I started vaping, or I started using this because I had a lot of anxiety, or I had a lot of, bad feelings, or I was dealing with this big problem. And what they don't always realize is that's not going to help. They see a lot of TV shows, they see a lot of TikToks, a lot of social media that tells them that certain substances will help anxiety, when really they're not getting the facts that it doesn't help, that it can actually be more harmful or cause more feelings, right? So making sure we're putting those coping skills and helping them with coping skills, because they might not know them. So make sure we help them process big emotions they have them journal. They might enjoy journaling and getting their feelings out. Have them exercise, making sure they're eating at least a balanced diet. Healthy diet's always helpful. Allow them to take safe risks. Like we talked about, a talent show, trying out for a sport, asking somebody on a date. Those are all safe risks, right? Risks that are not going to harm you. Risks that, okay, they said no, that's all right. How can we do better next time? All right, you didn't make the team, that's okay. Or yes, you made the team, great. So things like that. Make time for their friends, right? So we have a large, like 8 wheels of wellness, or 8 dimensions of wellness, right? And we make sure that we also keep these going on our kids. So social wellness, right? Making sure they have time for their friends and they have time to be a teenager or to be a kid. Make sure they have someone to talk to, even if it's not you, as much as we want as parents, to be the person they go to. Making sure they at least have some adult in their life that they feel comfortable going to. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's, a grandparent. Maybe it's an aunt or uncle, an older sibling, whoever it is, making sure they feel safe to go to them, and then seek help if they need help. I know lots of the schools in Rock Hill have mental health counselors. There's also a substance use counselor at the schools. So making sure that if they need to talk to someone, we encourage them to talk to someone, because it might help them not to turn to a substance. There's still a lot of taboo feelings around mental health and around substance use, that not everyone wants to seek help, but seeking help can be amazing. It can change people's lives for the better once we do it. So that's my contact information. We do have a prevention newsletter that we have started sending back out. So if you want to be on that and kind of hear what's going on at Keystone, or hear what substances are trending in our area, you can email me and I will add you to that list. If you are concerned about your student, you can also email me and I can make sure to get you in contact with our substance use counselor at the school district.
Once again, I have learned so much. It truly is amazing how things change so quickly. I have a few questions and clarifications, and I don't really mean to put you on the spot. We use the word addiction a lot. Mm-hmm. What does addiction really look like? Is it about frequency? Is it about duration? Help. I mean, I don't want like a book definition, but when you work, certainly with Keystone, you work with young people. When might you say, yes, we have an addicted young person?
So a lot of times, that's a really good question. A lot of times addiction looks different in everyone. So most of the time it is going to be not just frequency, but the inability to control that frequency.
Oh, okay.
So like a lot of students that get caught vaping at school. Why did you bring the vape to school? Well, I needed it. Okay. Why didn't you leave it at home? You know, this was like your second time getting caught. Why would you still bring it knowing you're going to get in trouble? Well, because going 8 hours is too long. So that's kind of what we look for, is when they're making those taking those risks, not even though they know the consequences, because they feel the need to. Once someone starts having urges, for sure, that's when there's kind of an addiction component. So definitely frequency and inability to stop is when there is an addiction.
Thank you. That really helps. And from all of your presentations, it sounds as if that doesn't take very long, like a few times, particularly with vaping and tobacco, and certainly other controlled substances.
Yes. Yeah. Especially with nicotine, what people fail to realize is nicotine is truly one of the most fast addicting drugs there is. Like they used to say, after one cigarette, you can be hooked. That is true. And these vapes have much higher levels of nicotine than cigarettes did. So these kids that, are offered something and try it just once aren't realizing that as soon as they try it, sometimes they are the one that is now addicted to it just after one time. So a lot of times it starts slower though. So they might be like, okay, well, it was once. Well, now it's only when I'm with that group of friends. And it turns from, oh, I'm with that group of friends to, all right, well, I'm just going to do it, during school, to now I'm doing it all the time. So it starts, and it can be, a week or two. It can be a month or two. It really just depends. But yes, nicotine is one of the quickest addicting drugs out there.
Yeah, thank you. Cindy?
There is one question in the chat, which I'm going to read to the best of my abilities and hope that we're interpreting this correctly. What does it mean when someone replaces cigarettes that are tobacco with something that's sprayed with something and placed, in a cigarette box to appear to be the same cigarettes, and it burns like a vapor?
So I think I'm understanding this question from other things I've heard. So
Okay.
when it depends on what's being sprayed on it. Now, there have been rumors about certain THC and other high-level narcotics being sprayed on things and placed in cigarettes. The difference is going to be their burning temperatures. So if it's in a regular cigarette, certain things like a narcotic burn at a much quicker speed than THC would and than nicotine would. So that's going to burn off much quicker, and it's not going to get to the person's system probably like they're thinking it would. But THC being burned at that is still going to give some effects. I think that might help.
We'll see if they respond.
Yeah.
The other thing that, I'm always amazed about when you present is the images of what a vape looks like or what the THC looks like. When you looked at that Pop-Tart box, you have to look really carefully to see that it says hot tarts as opposed to Pop-Tarts. I don't understand how they get away with that, with copying. Is there not copyright protections? Are there not? I don't understand that.
I think there is. I think because it's being sold online, probably not through through markets. That's how they're kind of getting it done. I will say in states that marijuana is legal, they have had a 300% uptick in child poisonings from cannabis and marijuana. All the kids have survived, but because obviously if a parent has that on the counter, kids are not going to be like, oh, there's a letter different, let me not eat it. So it's kind of a serious thing when we look at it like that, kids don't always read.
Absolutely not. And they're made to look like those common things that you would have on the counter, or something that to draw their attention, whether they're 2 or whether they're 6 or whether they're 12. They're designed to draw the attention.
Oh, right along that line, I noticed in one of your frames that the fragrance was cherry pie or Girl Scout cookie.
Yeah.
I did a double take.
Yeah.
I mean, what the ages that the ads are focused on is really something.
Yeah. And I love to kind of explain and tell people, like, listen, as much as they will say, like, it's not marketed to kids, the proof is kind of in the pudding, as they say. Like, you can tell, I don't know, adults, they're going to be like, oh yeah, that's super great. But I know lots of teenagers that are going to, head over heels for some of the stuff that this looks like. And so they know that if they get kids younger, they'll be hooked longer, so they get more money. And
Yeah,
it's a sad reality.
it really is. But that's why we're here, to share this with our community.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to mention, you talked toward the end about, we want you first and foremost, of course, to go to your parents, your guardians, your grandparent, go to the adults.
Yes.
And talk. But if for some reason there's a hesitation, like you say, there are adults at school, not only always your school counselor. I'm thinking particularly of our athletes. Our athletes, many are struggling with whether it's a fine line of addiction or dabbling or whatever term we want to use. And the coach is a great person to start with as well, if for some reason they're hesitant to go to their adults in their family. But they need to go to someone. And I'm glad you mentioned also, we do have a site-based therapist. We also have in every school a behavior management assistant or a crisis management assistant that see all children, regardless of what they want to talk about. So there is an adult at school, not to mention there are classroom teachers, the administration and everybody else. They are there for children and young adults in particular. So we really want to promote that. I also wanted to mention, thank you again for bringing up all these new terms. I was taking notes furiously. Crossfaded, that was a new one. Not that, we look at you to keep up with all of this. Also the carts, that was new. I had not heard of that. So I appreciate you bringing all the new language that we need to, as we keep our ear open to our children, our students, to understand what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Their language is always changing, for sure.
Oh my.
Exactly. And I think one of the other very important points is that parents should not be afraid to open these conversations with their children. The parents are their teachers, their child's first teacher. And at any age, they should be available. And to be a good listener, use open-ended questions, be a good listener, and don't be afraid of those conversations all through the life of a child. And even when they get older, like mine that are in their 30s, they're going to ask difficult questions, but you have to be prepared for them. And then you also have to give an honest answer. And if you don't know the answer, to find out, to ask somebody who may know that can help you to get your child on the right track.
Absolutely.
I agree. All right. Well, as we close out, anything else in the chat?
No, there's nothing else in the chat, but I did want to mention that I did put the Rock Hill Schools mental health hotline and Keystone's number in the chat there, so that if anybody comes back to this later, they have the both contact information.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I appreciate you doing that. We always want to alert our community and make sure they remember. Allison, again, we thank you. Thank you for the update, your wonderful presentation. You are not assuming, you are real, and this is why and more you reach our children and our community. So we thank you. The advertisers, the promoters, it's really something. So we appreciate you bringing us up to date. We're thankful for your expertise in this area, and we hope you will continue to present to our Rock Hill community. I also want to thank our viewers. This is our 3rd year. I believe it's our 3rd year anniversary. We started right around now in 2020. And we thank you for our viewers that have been watching every week, almost every week. We understand things come up, but remember to tell your friends, because we look forward to presenting to you, our Rock Hill family and community, every week. Do check. Sometimes we'll be on Tuesdays, sometimes we'll be on Thursdays. So thank you. And remember, all sessions are free and open to the Rock Hill community and beyond. We will always air from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, but look for those advertised dates. All right, to our viewers, have a great night. Allison and Cindy, so glad you were with us tonight. Rock Hill, stay well, and we'll see you next time.